John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave the power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. I want to ask you this morning, where do you stand? Where do you stand when God shows up? Where do you stand? Do you reject him or receive him? Do you leave him out in the cold or invite him into the home of your life? Where do you stand? Do you believe in him or believe him to be a lie? Is he real to you? Or is Jesus just another fairy tale, just another story, just another myth? Where do you stand? And now I know a lot of you this morning, you're looking at me thinking, well, of course we accept him. Of course, when God shows up, we receive him. Of course we let him in. But truth be told, it's easy to say, but much, much more difficult to do. And truth be told, many of us here today, from long-time believers to first-time church attendees, if we were to be honest with ourselves, we would confess, yes, I want to let him in, but yes, I'm living like he's just another story. I'm living like he's just a fairy tale, just a myth. And so I'm asking you today, be honest with yourself. Where do you really stand when God shows up? When Jesus becomes flesh, where do you stand? What is your reaction? How do you respond to you accept or reject this Word made flesh that lives among us? I really love how Eugene Peterson translates those words in the Message. Instead of the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, like we hear in verse 14, Peterson puts it this way: and the Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. He moved into the neighborhood. Can you imagine being neighbors with Jesus? Now, for some of us, that doesn't sound like a very bad deal. That doesn't sound like a bad scenario at all. It'd be a great thing to have Jesus as a neighbor. But for others, truth be told, Jesus is the neighbor you just don't want. When I was growing up as a teenager, we had this little dog named Rowdy, and he was a small dog, especially compared to the Rottweiler that our neighbors right next door had. And now you need to know this, that our house was only about 10 feet away from our neighbors, and so you could stand in our kitchen, and you could look through our kitchen window and see straight into the dining room window of our neighbors next door. And every day, this huge dog, this vicious-looking dog would stare out of that dining room window, and he would simply bark and bark and bark at our house, like it was waiting to get us, like it was lying in wait for its prey. One day, as I was walking my small dog around the block, this evil Rottweiler was tied up in the neighbor's backyard. I came around the corner of the house, and there he was. He saw me. He saw my little dog, Rowdy, and it started running straight for us. But I wasn't really scared because I knew he was tied up. And I knew he wasn't going to be able to get to us. I was sitting there waiting for it to get yanked back into the yard, kind of like the dog out of the old Foghorn Leghorn cartoons. But it never happened. It just kept coming. I picked my little dog up, I began running, and the Rottweiler kept at us and jumping at me, clawing at us, trying to get my dog, and finally we got away. But it wasn't over yet. You see, a few days later, as I was getting ready to take Rowdy out again, the neighbor's dog heard us getting ready. He broke through the screen door of their back porch, ran across our backyard, got up onto our steps. I didn't know he was there, and as soon as I opened our door, that dog was in our house. He had his jaws locked around Rowdy's little neck. You see, many of us view Jesus as this kind of neighbor. We see him as this big cosmic dog that is just out to get us. This big dog that's out to hurt us, that's out to destroy us, that's just waiting for the right moment to attack. But the thing is, when Jesus moves into the neighborhood, he doesn't just move in down the street or even next door to us. He wants to move in with us, into our lives, into our homes, into our jobs, our marriages, our families. He wants to move in to our very being. In Revelation 3:20, we hear these words of Jesus. Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. Now I want to ask you this morning, when God shows up, when he shows up knocking on the door of your life, where do you stand? You see, the Word becoming flesh and dwelling among us and living among us, as John explains it here. It is the loudest knock you can imagine. It's not just some little tap, tap, tap. God is literally pounding and beating on the doors of life. He wants to come in. He wants to live with us. He wants to live in us. And so I ask you this morning, where do you stand? What is your reaction? How do you respond when God shows up knocking? A couple of months ago, my wife Rebecca and I heard a loud knocking at our front door, which is not extremely unusual except for the fact that it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I grabbed my flashlight and my old trusty metal baseball bat. My wife grabbed the cell phone and was ready to dial 911. And I went to the door and I looked through the other side and I could see a figure standing there. And he kept knocking on the door. And I wasn't sure why he was there. And as a matter of fact, I didn't even give him a chance. He could have been there because maybe his car broke down or maybe he was just simply at the wrong house. But in my mind, he was simply there to rob us, just waiting for me to open the door a little bit so he can push his way in and take everything we have. And so as I approached the door with my flashlight and my trusty baseball bat, I yelled through the door as loudly and as forcibly as I could, "You need to leave. You can't be here. You need to go, and you need to go now." And at that, the man turned around, he got in his car, and he left. I can't help but think that this is how many of us respond to God when he shows up knocking on the doors of our lives. And he comes unexpectedly. He comes at inconvenient times. We're not really certain of what he wants or what he just might ask us to do. And so we're fearful if we let him in, that he just might rob us of our lives, of our fun, of our joy, of ourselves. And so I ask you, where do you stand? Where do you stand when God shows up knocking? What is your reaction? How do you respond? Do you reject him or do you receive him? Do you view him as some pesky neighbor, as a dog waiting to get you, or a thief waiting to rob you? Maybe you react to God's knocking kind of like Thidwick, the big-hearted moose. The 1948 children's book by Dr. Seuss. Thidwick, who lived in a herd of about 60 or more, accepts a bug living on his antlers for free. Because Thidwick has a big heart. And he wants to do the right thing and to be a good host. Well, the bug tells a spider of the free housing, and both the bug and the spider accept a Zinazoo bird. And the herd rejects Thidwick after the Zinuzu bird's wife, a woodpecker, and 4 squirrels also move in to Thidwick's antlers. But Thidwick, with his big heart, who wants to do the right thing, and he wants to be a good host, he allows them to stay. Soon after, a bobcat and a turtle settle in. Winter moves on, and although food is scarce, they refuse to let Thidwick travel to the other side of the lake. And so Thidwick, with his big heart, who wants to do the right thing, who wants to be a good host, he allows them all to stay. And then even more pressure hits the poor moose after 3 mice, a fox, a bear, and 362 bees move into his antlers. But trouble switches fast after seeing hunters who must get his head, this incredible head with this incredible set of antlers for the Harvard Club wall. When Thidwick is trapped and about to literally lose his head, he suddenly remembers that antler shedding season has arrived. And Thidwick, with his big heart, who wants to do the right thing, he wants to be a good host, finally has his answer. His antlers fall off. He abandons his guests to their doom. He swims to the other side of the lake to rejoin his herd, and his antlers, along with all the former squatters, are stuffed and mounted on the Harvard room wall. Now you may be thinking today, what in the world does that have to do with how we respond to God? What does that story have to do with anything? Well, many of us are just like Thidwick. We want to do the right thing. We want to be good hosts. And so when God knocks, we let him in. Oh, not because we want to, but because we are supposed to. We live in relationship with God out of obligation, not out of love. It's kind of like a shotgun wedding. This kind of relationship with God, it's like visiting the Biltmore. Have you ever been to the Biltmore? Built in the early 20th century by the Vanderbilts in Asheville, North Carolina, it is a 135,000 square foot home with an indoor pool, a bowling alley, tons and tons of bedrooms, bathrooms, living rooms, all that kind of stuff. It attracts thousands of people every year. Only when you go, you don't have full access to the house. You can't take pictures. There are tons of restricted areas. There are places you just can't go. There are rooms that are roped off. You can only kind of peek into them around a corner. And furniture is off limits. You see, when we let God in out of obligation, it's like saying, okay, Lord, you can come in, but this room right here, don't go in that room. And these things that are over here, don't touch those things over there. Just leave them alone. You know that attic up there? Oh, it's kind of off limits right now, God. I really don't want you into the attic. We don't give him full access. We let him in, but we really don't want him there. And so I ask you, where do you stand when God shows up, knocking on the door of your life? Do you reject him or receive him? Do you see him as a big cosmic dog waiting to attack, a thief waiting to rob, or do you let him in out of obligation, with limited access to your life, just because you're supposed to? Where do you stand? John tells us that to all who receive him, who believe in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or the will of man, but of God. You see, when God shows up, knocking on the doors of our lives, and we let him in with full and unrestricted access to everything we have, to everything we are, when we give him permission to search through our deepest, darkest closets, to know our most guarded secrets, something incredible happens. God does not destroy us. He renews us. God does not rob us. He fills us. He fills us with love and joy and peace and life. Everything we need, have needed, or will ever need, Jesus himself becomes if we let him in. See, when we freely and humbly allow God into our lives, into our homes, into our jobs, our marriages, our families, and into our very being, we will not find a fairy tale. We will find truth. We will not find this big cosmic dog waiting to destroy. We will find a merciful and loving God waiting to forgive. We will not find a thief that is waiting to rob, but a generous and gracious God, longing to fill us and overflow us with His goodness. And God today, right here, right now, He is knocking. And He has been knocking for a very long time. As a matter of fact, He's been knocking since the beginning. You see, John does something very interesting here in his first gospel. And notice that the three words John uses first, in the beginning, are identical in every way to the first three words in Genesis 1. In the beginning. And John has done this truly on purpose. And you see, he is making a distinct and intentional connection back to Genesis 1, back to creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the deep. The literal translation there in the Hebrew for formless and void, they're the words tohu and vohu, which simply mean chaos and confusion. I like how the Message puts it again. Eugene Peterson writes it this way: the earth was a soup of nothingness, a bottomless emptiness, an inky blackness. And you see, John is making the connection to say that this is what our world is like. Right here, right now. It is full of confusion and chaos. Life feels like nothingness. It is full of emptiness. The world is overcome with darkness. As a matter of fact, those may be words that some of us right here today in this very place would use to describe our very lives. But God said, "Let there be light." You see, He spoke order into the chaos of the beginning. He spoke understanding into its confusion. He spoke light into its darkness. He spoke substance into its emptiness. And through Jesus Christ, the light that shines in the darkness, He does the very same thing today. God speaks. He speaks love into lonely lives. He speaks restoration into broken relationships. He speaks purpose into desperation. He speaks fullness into emptiness. He speaks strength into weakness. He speaks provision into need. He speaks light into darkness. He speaks life into death. But before He speaks, He knocks. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me. But to all who received Him, who believed in His name, He gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. It moved into our neighborhood. And we have seen His glory. The glory is of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. So I ask you, where do you stand when God shows up knocking?